SAIL Disability Network Upper Peninsula logo. Picture of UP in orange and blue paint circle. SAIL Accessibility Consultation Services Access for All logo. Green and blue words titled Access with exclamation point at end and for all underneath. A SAIL conversation with lawyers about the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA. 4 persons on screen in separate boxes. Sarah Pirikovsky in office wearing blue shirt and orange sweater. Lucy Wilcox in office wearing black and white shirt and glasses. Kim Whitaker in office wearing teal, black, and white with glasses. Brian Sheridan in office wearing blue shirt and glasses.
I just want to say welcome and thank you so much to Kim and Brian for joining us today on our SAIL ADA 30th birthday celebration. I'm going to real quickly before we go into introductions of who's here. I'm Sarah Pirikovsky. I'm the Executive Director of SAIL, the Disability Network of the UP. But I want to make sure that people in our audience today knows that SAIL wants to clarify that this is not a legal support panel, but rather a conversation touching on the significant differences between civil and criminal law. Our focus is on the need for strong personal advocacy if one believes they are being discriminated against in violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act or the ADA. So I want to introduce Lucy Wilcox, who is our Accessibility Services Coordinator here at SAIL.
Thank you, Sarah.
And we also have Kim Whitaker. Kim Whitaker is an attorney who practices in the areas of estate planning, elder law, and special needs/disability planning. She has experience with government programs in the area of Medicaid, Social Security, SSI, and veterans benefits. In addition to being an attorney, she is the mother of a child with a cognitive disability and understands the importance of focusing on ability, quality of life, and the importance of inclusion in all aspects of life. Thanks for being on our panel today, Kim.
Thanks, Sarah.
And Brian Sheridan was born in Detroit, Michigan. He attended the University of Michigan, which I want to say go blue, where he earned his BA in 1971. He then attended the University of Michigan Law School and completed his law degree in 1975, as well as being admitted to the Michigan bar in that year. Brian has served on a number of committees during his legal career focused on accessibility. The Committee on Disabilities of the Open Justice Commission of the State Bar of Michigan, Access to Justice for All Task Force, and Service Delivery Subcommittee Work Group B, Access Issues Regarding Special Populations. Although we cannot share Brian's full resume, SAIL would like to acknowledge and honor his colleagues at the Michigan State Bar who awarded him the Profiles and Courage Award, State Bar of Michigan, September of 2002, for work on access for the deaf and hard of hearing to the court system. So thanks for joining us, Brian.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, so we wanted to welcome you to our panel, and I'll let Lucy kind of jump into some questions and get us started.
Yes, thank you, Kim and Brian. And I thought about the importance of this panel from my perspective with doing accessibility work for the past couple of years with SAIL. And often people say, well, it's wrong, have it fixed. You know, this isn't compliant with ADA, fix it. And, or people just believe it's such an onerous task. It seems that it's one way or the other. Either somebody must be responsible to fix this, or it's impossible. And so I just wanted to have this opportunity to reach out with our community and kind of discuss the real challenges that the ADA poses as a civil law for who's in charge, my way of thinking, who's the sheriff. And so we wanted to, before going into kind of your responding to that, I wanted to make sure that whether there was any other background information that we didn't share in the introduction, or any personal information that you'd like to share before we get started with questions.
Well, I can tell you, I'm an attorney. I'm not a disability rights attorney. I'm a real estate business transaction banking attorney. But as I began to lose my hearing, I did extensive research on the obligation of the court system to provide accommodations for me. I wrote 2 articles about that, which were published in the Michigan Bar Journal. And what I did not find any real resistance to what I was asking for. What I did find is I had to educate the people in what kind of accommodation I needed. You can't just go in and say, you know, I'm hard of hearing. You really need to do your own groundwork and homework and see what type of accommodation you need. You need real-time reporting. If you're assigned, you need an interpreter, etc. And once the court system understood that, it was they were very cooperative up here, at least. This is a small community. I'm talking about the UP courthouses around there. But I also found each courtroom is considered a county facility. So each county runs it. There's no statewide requirements of, yes, we all have the same system. Each courthouse would have a different system. Sometimes I had to bring my own equipment. Sometimes they assumed I knew how to operate the system, which I sometimes actually did, but not always. And the vendor would install it and leave, and then people would say, well, I think this is the on button. And then, you know, if you talk to them about two-coil loops and infrared and all that stuff, they kind of get it glazed over look, not because they're in opposition to you, they just don't understand it. So you need to be a self-advocate, you need to educate yourself, and at least for my accommodations, you've got to be pretty tech savvy. If you ask them about, is your courthouse accessible, they'll say yes. We have elevators, we have wheelchair ramps, we're totally accessible.
Mhm.
But hearing loss is the single most prevalent disability in the United States, really. And if you can't hear, you are denied access as much as somebody in a wheelchair who can't find an elevator or a ramp. You'll sit there and the people might as well be speaking Chinese or something because you can't follow what's going on. And this is not, you know, these courtrooms aren't social clubs. I mean, things of great importance are happening that will affect you, whether you're an attorney, whether you're one of the parties, whether you're a juror, whether you're a witness, and under the ADA, even if you're a spectator, you have a right to those accommodations. And you really need to push the buttons to get that. But I at least never found anyone saying, no, we're not going to do that, or no, it's too expensive. And because it's actually not very expensive compared to some of the other renovations I had to do. So I've talked too long. That's my input.
Yeah.
So
Thank you.
I can pipe in. I think Brian said it really well in that the law, I don't think people are confused about the law, but how to apply the law and to deal with people's specific needs, they don't really know. And they are open to having the discussion and making accommodations that are requested. And that's been my experience. So when I've always approached things, especially with my daughter, now, with clients, it's a little bit differently because the relationship's different. But with my daughter, it was always starting the conversation, explaining what was needed for the accommodation so that she could function and get the support she needed with her limitation. And when we had that conversation, people were very responsive. And a lot of times they might not have an answer and they look for you to provide help as to what the accommodation is needed. And just in the court setting, as Brian talked a lot about his personal experience, but my daughter loves Law and Order shows. She knows mom's an attorney. And when she got her first jury, request to come in and sit in the jury, she was gung-ho. but she has a cognitive disability, and for her to walk into the courthouse and understand where she checks in, what she's supposed to be doing, that was going to be a little bit overwhelming. So I contacted the court administrator, who was all open about whatever she needed. She got to serve, you know, in at least through the jury selection process, and came home feeling very good about herself because she was a participant in the system. So it's all about inclusion, and it's all about figuring out what the accommodations that are needed. That's simple, because in reality, sometimes there's financial issues, and can we work those things out? But you got to start the conversation.
So you've given us a couple of really excellent examples about the need for, Brian, with your self-advocacy that's defining, you know, where you take the responsibility to define the accommodation that you really need, or at least responsibility for having a thorough conversation about that. And Kim, with your daughter, again, taking her desires, her goals seriously, and working through accommodations for her. And going out with the telescope getting bigger. So with the ADA, without self-advocacy, it sounds like you're not going to get very far with civil law, that you really have to take a very active role.
Yes, very true. For one thing, if you have a hearing loss, that's not necessarily going to be evident to people, and you need to self-identify what your disability is, and it's enormously helpful if you have some idea of what type of accommodations you need or what type of accommodations are out there. I did a lot of research on that, and I had to be part of the process instead of just saying, I can't hear, do something for me. Yeah, but they did. I mean, I made it clear, all I want is to sit there and have as good a participation as my opposing lawyer did. You know, when he got out of bed that morning, because he doesn't need any of this stuff. He goes there and it's not even a factor. And for me, it was always a factor. And if I was going to effectively represent my clients in court, which I do, I had to have those accommodations. And if I could not get those accommodations, or if they didn't work, and that was always a possibility, they try everything, but it doesn't really work, then I wouldn't be a courtroom attorney. And, you know, there's some things I know I can't do. I can't be an air traffic controller, okay? So I'm not going to ask for accommodations. You don't want me to be your air traffic controller. So you really need to be an active part of the process, engaging with whatever the public facility is. Every court in Michigan has an ADA coordinator. And sometimes it's just somebody that works there, and they say, okay, now in addition to being the judge's secretary or the ADA coordinator, but that's where you could start. The Supreme Court of Michigan has a form called Request for Accommodation. I don't think it's a very good form because it's not specific enough about what the accommodation is, but it's a start. And you need to engage in a very active dialogue with those people and see it. And in my case, I always went to the courthouse if it was going to be a protracted thing, you know, a day or two before. Like, I don't want to get there and everybody's there and it doesn't work, or they can't turn it on, or the batteries are dead, or whatever. So you really need to be a very active participant in that process.
And as you say that, I certainly know from years in working in the field of mental health that there are a significant number of people who don't have the experience, the skills, the confidence to self-advocate. And what steps and what kinds of accommodations then do those individuals need?
I think one thing that's important, I come from the background where I raised a child from birth with a cognitive disability. My daughter was born with Down syndrome. So you learn as you're helping this little life mold that you have to figure out what the areas of need are. My daughter was able to do certain things that maybe another individual couldn't do. And raising a child with a disability, your focus is on their abilities and then working with the accommodations so that they can go out in the world. Hopefully, an individual that has been born with a disability and has built a network around them, either through the education system, through teachers, through people that are very skilled in the IEPs and putting together what these needs are and building skills along the way, or transportation services if they're going to be using the bus system and the disability access that's provided. Within libraries, they have, certain libraries set up for hearing impaired and deaf. So as you're navigating the system of life and these organizations and people that help you, they may help you to identify an area where you could get support and accommodations in, but maybe you don't know you can, and you can start asking. And so we were very fortunate to have great support team around us. I hear stories and clients come to me that don't have that. And I think education, doing the types of things SAIL is doing so that that's public awareness, people start asking the questions and maybe start to realize that we can get support here, or this isn't right, or like it started a long time ago with people in wheelchairs that would get, they would navigate their neighborhoods, but there'd be a curb that was not user-friendly for wheelchair access. And those changes started moving through governments and they started changing requirements. So I agree with Brian, you have to be extremely creative, but education and public awareness, I think, helps people to begin to question what may be accommodations that they haven't even thought to ask about.
I actually have do you mind, Lucy, real quick? I have a quick question. So we sometimes get phone calls from the public where they'll call and say, this local establishment, and it's lots of times restaurants, because a lot of people attend and go to restaurants with family or for occasions, birthday parties or anniversaries. And they'll say, this local restaurant doesn't have an accessible front door, and you guys need to go over there and tell them to make it accessible because that's what you do. And lots of times when we start going through the process and saying, well, let's talk through what the issues are, maybe, like it might be something you could try to help talk with the business on. Oh, no, I don't want to do that. I would rather have you guys go in. And so that education of being able to explain to somebody what they can do and what kind of power they might have to make those relationships with those businesses, because that business doesn't really know the law maybe, or they know it, but they don't know they have to follow it. They don't understand. So what would you say would be one of those first steps for somebody that hasn't had a disability all their life, that maybe has acquired it and then wants to go to their favorite establishment And now they realize, wow, I can't get in, but I don't know that I have that power to change them. What would you guys say from your perspective as to the first step for them?
Well, I think there are agencies, well, you could reach out to the establishment. Again, I'm not a disability rights lawyer, but I believe there are state and federal agencies, Kim would probably know more about this, that you could file a complaint with. I mean, most establishments, number one, aren't going to want to have to deal with that. Number two, probably realize that they are supposed to have that accommodation, especially a ramp. It's so obvious now, so prevalent. I mean, so some of the other things might get a little more complicated, but I defer to Kim on that.
I always encourage a phone call with the establishment. I hear what you're saying about they don't want to be involved, but you can't have a party in a lawsuit without someone being involved. So they have to be involved. So the way I always like to approach it is for an initial meeting, like let's get all the parties together, because you don't know, like, are these people willfully disobeying the Americans with Disability Act? Do they have no knowledge of it and they need to be educated? Are they falling under an exception? You know, some of these older buildings, without, you know, having to rebuild, and I'd have to research that part of the law, but there are some exceptions as well. But conversation, I tell all my clients, you don't want to jump into litigation. You want to try to see if you can mitigate it before you get to the point where you realize you have to start some type of a civil action.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Lucy.
Well, and I think that you're addressing, Sarah, what brings this up for me, because of talking with people and they're saying, well, your sale, you know, you should be doing this. And so part of, you know, wanting to have this conversation and have it as part of our recognition of the ADA and what an amazing law in so many ways it is, but that the individual still has a huge responsibility for making it so. You know, if something isn't right in a building where you want to go eat dinner, and you were able to eat dinner there up until you wound up in the wheelchair 6 months ago, and you don't want to give that up, to help people understand that it's a civil law, and so there is the need to take some personal responsibility, personal interest in the outcome. That we can certainly, there are places where we've been asked to go and review, and it's pretty easy to kind of just go in and say, okay, you know, we're just going to look at these 4 key points and see how you do, and we can give you a very simple little report about it. And, well, yes, you know, we've gotten a few reports that there are people who want to come to your restaurant and can't. But without any community, you know, involvement, without that individual involvement, it's pretty easy to say,
Yeah, I can definitely state that the Montgomery County Courthouse would not have accommodations for hearing impaired. I mean, they might by now, but I'm talking, I don't know, 15 years ago at least. I'm guaranteed they would not have had that without my requesting it. And I talked to judges in other counties, and they have to go hand in hand to the county board. The county board has to approve it, and you know, they say they really regret having had to turn down jurors who were otherwise, you know, very engaged, very qualified. They tell the judge, I can't hear what's happening in the courtroom, so the judge has to excuse them to be fair to the other participants, but would very much like to have kept them on if there could have been an accommodation. And also they were not aware of what was available out there, and it's better now than it was before. But yeah, you need to advocate. I mean, I also have a daughter with Down syndrome, just to even myself up with Kim here. And, you know, I've had to advocate for her too. Although that's a different situation, but, and it's a bit of a hodgepodge of laws. The federal courts are not under the ADA. The federal courts are exempt from the Federal Rehabilitation Act. They do have an internal policy that requires those accommodations, and I was able to have that accommodation made in the federal courthouse in Marquette, which is the United States District Court for the Western District of Michigan, covers the whole UP. They have an accommodation there. And interestingly, when I went in there last time, they said, well, we have a loop system, which is a telecoil loop system. And if you have a T-coil and a hearing aid or cochlear implants like I have, that's great. And I said, wonderful. Does it cover the whole courtroom or just where the counsel sat? And they said, well, no, it's just for the judge. It's just around the judge's bench so the judge can hear. I thought, oh my gosh, you wired up a loop system just for the judge. And you didn't think about hard of hearing attorneys, and you didn't think about hard of hearing jurors, and you didn't think about hard of hearing spectators. So there is some tunnel vision sometimes. The judge needs it, so the judge gets it. But anyway, lots of stories, but that's good. The other issue I dealt with was air travel, because it's a nightmare for somebody with a hearing impairment to be in an airport and try to hear these announcements. For years, when I'd fly back and forth out of Marquette, the Marquette flight would just be in a general area. The people would be sitting there waiting for that flight and other flights, which they would announce over the loudspeaker, which I could not understand, still can't. And some people would get up and start to go on a plane. So I would just have to try to identify someone that I knew, which is pretty frequent back then, that I'm 99% sure was flying to Marquette. So when they got up, I got up and went there. So that's, you know, that's, sometimes you just have to shift for yourself, I guess.
And I do want to tell you, Brian, that when we do our annual chocolate festival quite a few years ago, and we thought, oh, it'd be great if we could present, and you happened to be there, and you came up and just said, you know, I can't really hear what they're saying. I don't think it was until this year that it really, really embedded in, and we were able to create, at the chocolate festival we had at Northern, 2 large screens where anything I wanted to talk about or over the speaker or I wanted people to hear about, I made it into a captioning. And when we drew the drawing numbers for them, we put them up on the wall right away. And it was, you know, it's like, we should know that even as an agency, but it's, you know, until you're like, get somebody like you that just kind of put it in my ear and bug in your ear. So I think that people should also recognize how important just even small comments can, you know, help somebody educate and then try to pull that and get the best as possible out for people that have hard of hearing. So I think that, you know, you should never be afraid to just make even small comments, because you never know how far that can go.
Sure.
Thank you for that, by the way.
Okay. That's it.
No,
I do that a lot, actually, because it's people call it an invisible disability. You know, you don't think, you make an announcement and you don't think, well, this guy's over there, he looks okay, you know, what's his problem? But if you can't hear, you can't hear. And it is a very difficult disability to have, actually, because you are in a milieu where the main communication of people is verbal. And I mean, I've got these external cochlear implants, so it's pretty obvious I've got some situation going on, but before that, I didn't, and a lot of people don't, or the hearing aids now, they make them so small because nobody wants to be seen with the hearing aid. I think they're sacrificing some efficiency that way, but you can't tell. So sometimes you just have to go forward and make those accommodations for large groups,
Yeah.
even though nobody's asked for them. And even possible, maybe nobody will be using them. I was at a conference once given by the, actually it was the Division on Deaf and Hard of Hearing, which of all places you think would be tuned into this. They were giving a presentation at Northern, and they announced at the start that if you can't hear, we have assistive listening devices available, but they announced that verbally. And I didn't have cochlear implants. And fortunately, my wife was with me. And she said, they have something you can use. And I thought later, well, the people you're trying to reach didn't hear the announcement. It's like you gotta keep thinking about that, like you said, Sarah.
You made me think with that, with the assistive hearing devices, that I was really impressed at one of the Catholic churches I went to in San Francisco. And they had a basket in the front of the church and a basket in the back of the church on a table with assistive devices available to anybody who could benefit from that. And I think, Sarah, your point about, or Brian, you followed up with her point about you don't, even if you're not asked for the accommodation, that making an accommodation may wind up helping any number of people in any number of ways. And having a message up on the screen, just so you don't have to be tuned in to all the, because there's so much background, and if you're me, you're already engaged talking loudly with somebody. So having, making events, making experiences accessible can wind up improving the experience for a lot of people. Any thoughts?
The other advantage is it becomes kind of automatic then. You always have those things out there, and you don't wait for someone to ask, and you just have them out there all the time. And even some people that wouldn't know what they were or know that they were available will say, oh, I'll try this, and it's great. So you're providing an education as well as an accommodation.
One thing that's coming up on with these face masks that we're all using, they're now making face masks with the clear plastic so that anyone that reads lips has that ability, because that's affected them, the ability to read lips with everyone's mouth covered up.
Well, that whole thing is a nightmare for hard of hearing people, because number one, you're supposed to stand 6 feet away from the person, and if you have a hearing problem, your tendency is to want to get as close as you can, because the volume is, logarithmic with distance and all that stuff. That's number one. Number two, you want to read their lips. And number three, you want to see their facial expressions, which most of us do anyway, but that is, we people in my position have learned to interpret those as well as lip movements, and you can't see any of that. I was in a facilitated mediation 2 days ago, and the lawyer at the opposite end of the table, I mean, at least 8 feet away from me, had a mask on, and I just said, I can't understand you. And he took it off, he had no problem. But I'm sure he didn't think of it that way, because I can't see his face, I can't see his lips. The mask is muffling his voice. He's 8 feet away from me for distancing, and it's just not a good situation for us. Hopefully a temporary one. I think a transparent mask, and I've seen those, Kim, on some websites, would be helpful.
And that's such an important point, Kim and Brian, that compliance with required or expected behavior, you can be seen as rude or you know, not paying enough attention, or you just don't care, rather than there's a genuine need here that's not being accommodated. And I appreciate, Brian, how you identified 3 very powerful factors. If a person's hearing impaired, you're going to rely on several channels of information to try to get to accommodate for yourself, or to navigate a world filled with noise. And it is those, it's this educational experience. It's trying to see, and that's really one of the things I wanted to make sure to ask both of you was, SAIL, we're working to develop our accessibility program and make it stronger, and to serve more of the communities in the UP. And what kinds of ideas might y'all have about how to build for the future? How can SAIL as an organization be more active?
I think just going off of the types of phone calls I get from clients and potential clients, knowing that SAIL is a resource and that there's information, and now with this new ADA coordinator position, which I think is probably underutilized because people don't know much about it. It's been something badly needed up here in the UP. I think just education. I got calls from individuals, I believe they're probably more so students at the university, falling under the Fair Housing Act, that the landlords are denying them their emotional support animal, and they don't understand, or the landlords are learning that they can't charge, pet deposits and additional rent for someone that has an emotional support animal. So, I mean, that's one thing I see, access and an ADA coordinator. Another thing, and I know Northern has it, has their own department there, but if an individual doesn't self-disclose their disability, and they don't have to, they're not required by law to do it, but if they don't disclose, then they can't really ask for the accommodation. And so I get calls from students who are having problems, who do have underlying disabilities, and it's trying to understand how to connect with, the department so that they can get an accommodation, so that they can complete their schooling and get what they need to get the support they need. There's lots of things going on, but I really do believe that the more SAIL advertises and people know that your group is a go-to, I think it will help expand access.
I agree. I really don't have anything to add to what Kim said. People need to be aware that you are a resource, and what you are a resource for, what you offer, what you can offer. And but the disabled person in the end has to step up to the plate and advocate for themselves, become involved in the solution to their particular need, work with the landlord, the facility, the university, the courthouse, whatever it is. And I don't really know anything about landlords, but I know at the government level, courthouse, university, people that I dealt with were very accommodating. Although Northern at one point some time ago had to be made to understand that their responsibility to provide accommodation for an event held, say, in the Great Lakes rooms was on the owner of the facility, not on the sponsor of the event. And we did some scrambling around for a while, but they finally got the idea. And Forrest Roberts Theater has an excellent assisted listening system, and all the actors on the stage wear these microphones you can hardly see. But so I've attended plays there, which I never used to do, and I hear every single word, sometimes better than people without a hearing loss, because I'm getting it directly from the microphone. They're getting it through the speakers. There are some situations where I hear better than other people because the software filters out the background noise, and that's always nice once in a while.
So I'm hearing, you know, like between the two of you as well, and a thank you. Those are fantastic information for me as a director. But one big thing that I can hear from Kim is like disability awareness and helping people understand what their needs are so that they can ask, so that like if they don't always have to disclose what they think they have to disclose, but they can still ask for those accommodations. So being aware of where those lines are. And then also from Brian, I can hear how businesses have to understand it's their bottom line. It's their participants that are able to come in if they can make it more accessible. And it can be smaller things, but they have to think a little bit broader than just if they can get in through their front door, but really the experience, if that's what their business is about, or that customer service, or that ability to, you know, if they're, for, you know, current times, if you're a business and you have somebody walk in and you have a mask on and they don't, you know, if they have a hearing impairment, then you probably want to make sure that they're hearing you, and that if you're asking them, do you need anything in our business today, you know, that you can ask them that. So I really appreciate that. Those are really good points for me. I thank you.
Sure.
And Kim, you made me think about, we've done some outreach to NMU, and they have shifted their disability services coordinator, I think 3 times in the 2 years I've been here. And you made me think about backing it up, that education is the key for the person with the disability, as well as for the school or agency that's going to have a request for an accommodation. And I wonder how the high schools do with educating their juniors and seniors who are living with various disabilities about that. College is a whole different ballgame, you know, and they don't see their role as, my experience has been that the schools do not see the colleges, their role as providing assistance in navigating the university. They specifically are there to help with accommodations for your classes, for your specific classes. And if you've been in special ed and you've kind of been used to, at least up here, the same teachers maybe and the same kids for sure. And then all of a sudden you're thrown into a collegiate environment where it's not like high school at all. I wonder if, when you brought up education, whether there might be an earlier point of entry with those students to help them grow into their own advocacy.
Well, I think one thing is, you know, in Michigan, an individual can stay in special education until age 26. Now, if they opt out to graduate, which is real interesting because especially with autism and Asperger's syndrome, where we see some individuals that are very, very, very bright, sometimes hyper focused to the point that they're, you know, brilliant in certain areas and go on to college, and they have different things with their disabilities that they do need accommodations for. If there's a good transition from the high school into the college, you know, again, you're self-advocating, but the very first thing I would want to see with one of my clients is if you're transitioning high school to college, that you have an appointment with the disability coordinator or office at the university, that should be part of the orientation, because you're going to need to get some things hooked up for those individuals so they can have a seamless transition. And you would hope the university offers that.
Well, I can, being a dinosaur here, I can give you some pre-ADA anecdotes. My hearing loss was identified formally, at least when I was 10 years old. It was severe at the time. It was a nerve loss. They said hearing aids wouldn't help. And seat him in front of the classroom. So, you know, I went through elementary school, I went through high school, I went through 4 years of college and 3 years of law school at the University of Michigan, and I had no accommodations whatsoever. Number one, there probably weren't any available back then. So I would sit in the front of the class because that's where I could best hear and see what was going on and see the professor's lips, but then turn around right on the blackboard, nothing. So I had to work very, very hard just to get to where most people were, just sitting there. And there was never any thought in my mind or the university or high school's mind that I would, you know, get any kind of accommodation or that there could be any kind of accommodation. And I could tell you that was very tough, very tough. I watched a video of a woman with cochlear implants at Oxford University in England, and she has a real-time reporter for every class, and she had a note taker for every class so she could watch the real-time reporting and not have to take her own notes. And I thought, oh my God, if I'd had that, or even half of that, that would have been so wonderful. But the technology didn't exist then. So people should realize between the advances in the law and the advances of technology, I mean, they are really living in a good place right now because these things exist and they're available and people know they have to provide them.
Seems to be a great segue into one of those questions, Lucy, about the future, what you're kind of seeing for the ADA, or what we think, like if we're looking at absolutely accessible Upper Peninsula by 2050 is what Lucy's tagline is. What are some additional things that you both see that really need to change as we move forward, especially in the Upper Peninsula? I mean, I think we're a little bit behind some areas, but do you have any suggestions or ideas or things that you've thought about that future 30 years down the road?
Well, for courtrooms, which again, I keep focusing on because that's where I live, but the state of Michigan should adopt a uniform requirement and a system. So to me, at least, every courtroom has the same technology. When I go in, I know that, I mean, they have a neck loop system or they have infrared system and they know how to operate it, and I know how to operate my end of it, instead of it being a hodgepodge like it is now, and me having, back in the day, sometimes having to bring my own conference microphone and put it up on the judge's bench between the judge and the witness so I could hear both of them. So I think some statewide uniformity as far as the court system would be very helpful, and I'm surprised it hasn't happened yet. Who would pay for that, whether it be the county or the state, that would have to work out, but it's such a hodgepodge between different systems or no systems, and it's very confusing for the person with the hearing loss. Again, my focus here, going in and not knowing what they have, maybe not knowing how to operate it, how to interface it with their own hearing aids, cochlear implants, neck loops, whatever. So some statewide involvement in those types of things would be very helpful, because, you know, in the larger counties downstate, I would imagine, Wayne County, Ingham County, whatever, they probably got a technology staff right in the courthouse. And the federal court here has a technology guy, it's great, but, you know, you get out to Ontonagon or something, I mean, you're not going to have that level of expertise. It just doesn't exist, too small. So the state needs to step up its game and get involved, because it's so critical that people have access to the courthouse. This is not, you know, I mean, not belittling other aspects like restaurants or something, but if you're in a courthouse, you're usually there for something pretty serious.
Right.
So that's my 2 cents.
And I'd agree. Is, you know, think about the aging population we have, especially in probate court. You've got a lot of people that are appearing as parties that don't have, you know, good hearing, or they've got some type of loss going on where the inability to participate in the proceeding is affected by hearing. And I think people should be able to be on a jury regardless of
Sure.
hearing loss. So I totally agree with Brian. It should be addressed statewide. I'm really impressed with some of the work that the UP has done in terms of access in the sports and natural resource arena. And I know sales gotten involved in a lot of it, but to have the ramps for the kayaks, and to have some accessibility to get down to the lakes, and wheelchairs and things like that. I would like to see more of that. I don't, I know it's something that's important, and they seem to be doing things you don't see in other areas. One thing that is woefully lacking to me, that I think it is the entire community needs to be involved, is there needs to be better inclusion in the labor market. You know, recently they've talked about shutting down some of these sheltered workshops. And I think that there is an ability for all employers to employ individuals with disabilities, and to have access for whatever accommodations are needed. So I would like to see more of that moving forward. And I'd also like to see more inclusion, because it's easy to have communities and individuals with disabilities that have their own social groups, but until you truly integrate your community everywhere you go, and I think we're seeing it more in the schools and the kids, they're putting together buddy programs, and it's more inclusive. So those are areas I would like to see.
Thank you so much, Kim and Brian. Those are things that are really actionable. You know, there really are ways to look at that. And I just want to say for our audience, and I don't know, Brian or Sarah, if you know, that the way I met Kim was at a social function. It was at the Special Olympics winter dance. And Kim had just moved up here, and her family is in Ann Arbor, and she brought herself to the winter dance because she knew that some of her people were there. And I had met her briefly in a legal office, not for a problem, but for some moving forward, getting old work. And there she was, and it was just so meaningful to me that your life, your heart is, you know, that was who you came to join as part of your community in a new city. And I do agree with more inclusion in general. I think the really good news that we could probably say live here in our celebration was that the Hiawatha Music Festival has reached out to us for getting some information and ideas about making their events more inclusive and being sure they're inclusive enough. And so I think there is a push, and there's a really good primer that I found out of San Francisco for creating inclusive events and for creating inclusive protests, which if you want people to advocate, sometimes they may need to go out and mix it up with people who are out there protesting also. So it is, those are very exciting ideas, and that the labor market, yes.
Yes. Well, I don't want to keep you guys too much longer, but I really want to say thank you so much for your time. More importantly, I want to say thank you for your passion and your experience and your education that you bring to our communities, and that we really are grateful that you were willing to do this for us today, and really in celebration of the ADA and hopefully the 30 years down the road to make it absolutely accessible UP. So Lucy, do you also have anything at the end?
Just thank you, and I look forward to listening to the panel, because I think, Sarah, like you, I get caught up in the moment and probably miss a few things. So this was wonderful. Appreciate your time.
I'm glad to help. Glad to help.
Thank you, and keep up the good work.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Thank you.
right. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Sail Disability Network Upper Peninsula logo. Picture of UP in orange with blue paint circle. Sail Accessibility Consultation Services, Access for All logo. Green and blue words titled Access with exclamation point at end for all underneath. www.upsail.org/accessibility/.